Okay, let's get started. This is Eric Krajewski, Vice President of the Software Division at TDS. I want to thank you for joining our webinar, Enabling Change. Do you have a clear picture? In this webinar, we'll demonstrate an approach for breaking down complexity and managing change in IT and data centers. You will see how to quickly consolidate your collective knowledge in a unified knowledge base that covers your full IT environment. Regardless of your project, success will be elusive without accounting for IT complexity and relationships. You will see how to build an actionable vault of truth from your collective team knowledge that consolidates relevant information about all your assets, infrastructures, applications, and dependencies. And what we're showing you here is from Gartner Group, what they see about IT transformation, regardless of whether you're doing a data center relocation, cloud migration, technology refresh, or whatever. Gartner says that 80 to 90% of these efforts will fail. And a lot of the reasons they've identified this is due to the proliferation of federated systems, plug-and-play approach of mixed technologies, meaning that an application now is no longer delivered by one place or one system, and everything must work in concert in order to have an end-to-end availability. And so when you change this environment, you need to take an agile approach and break things down into longer sprints, shorter durations, and a lot more events. And approach hybrid transformation as a dynamic, ongoing process. The Achilles heel, the Gordian Knot, or the long pole in the tent, whatever you call it, migration success requires an accurate and clear picture and representation of your environment. You must be able to visualize and quickly understand all the relevant interdependencies and relationships that must be orchestrated in concert if you're to minimize downtime for users and applications of your IT infrastructure. And what you see here is silo tools that are very effective at doing their function, but when you try to do higher level change management, such as digital business transformation, business resiliency, hybrid migrations, or application virtual cloud migrations, you have to consolidate this information and avoid the problems of disparate processes and approaches and fragmented data of varying consistency and freshness. We will be taking questions at the end, which you can enter at any time using the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. And at this point, I would like to introduce Tim Schutt, VP of Data Center Services for TDS, who will lead the discussion. Tim?
Great. Thanks, Eric. As Eric said, we're going to really focus on getting that clear picture of your IT environment. You know, before you make any decisions and whatnot, regardless of what project you're undertaking, you want to understand what you have in your environment and be able to understand what you're going to do with that. So what we're going to do is jump into something that a tool that we've developed called Transition Manager, software suite that allows us to take that information, take it from all those disparate sources that Eric talked about, and load it into Transition Manager, and then make this data actionable so that you can get that clear picture of your environment and then understand what you need to do. So I'm going to jump into Transition Manager here. So that the screen that comes up here that they're showing is the multiple phases of a project, and this is a migration project that shows the discovery of the data and what's in your environment, analyzing that and planning through all the way out to execution. So Transition Manager is an end-to-end migration tool that's built to manage all of those phases of the system or of the project. What we want to focus on today really though is the data, getting the data into that system, and then what are you going to do with it, and how are you going to see what that data looks like. So what I'm bringing up here is a picture of the environment. So this is an IT environment. It's obviously smaller than probably most of the environments out there, but regardless of whether you have 100 applications or 500 or thousands of applications with infrastructure supporting, Transition Manager allows you to see that in a visual way. So lots of folks want to be able to see that versus looking at a whole bunch of lists in the spreadsheet and jumping back and forth to try to figure out how things are interconnected. So let's talk for a second about how does the data get there. And the slide that Eric showed that showed all the disparate sources, it could be from a CMDB, it could be from spreadsheets, it could be from a DSIM tool, output from an auto discovery tool, it can be from various sources. And what we'll do is we'll take all of that information and translate it, if you will, into Transition Manager. So understanding how we normalize the data and we don't understanding duplication and whatnot, and taking that data and doing bulk imports into the system. And what Transition Manager then becomes is the system of record collecting all of those disparate sources, and it's one source. It's a web-based application that customers and TDS consultants can access, and it gives everybody visual visibility into that in real time. So you'll be able to look at how things are interconnected and understanding what that data is. So you can manage any data conflicts or redundancies, or see that there's missing data. And then there becomes that need to get the people involved. So going through interview processes to understand and to really pull this whole picture together. So if I drill down here and if I take a look at one of the smaller groups that I might have within here, again, I can go through and I can freeze this graph, if you will, and I can start to pull information out to understand what sort of, what this server is or what this application is, and I can start to understand a little bit more. At any point in time, I can drill down into an application to see what those dependencies are, see information about the application and about what's involved in there. But I can also do a few other things in here, and really this is where we want to get to be able to say, okay, suggest some areas that I might want to split. So I can, again, I'm going to freeze this graph and show you, based upon this, the system is recommending, well, maybe you want to take a look at these two databases that are connected in here that are making everything all connected together. And if we move information off those servers onto separate database or whatnot, I can split some of that out, and then I can make this group smaller. So again, it allows us to take a look at information and make that data actionable, okay? So I can also take a look here. I'm going to find our Bugzilla application. And if I look at an application here, for example, and again, here's all these interdependencies and information about that, but I can also look at a architectural view of that that's a little bit smaller. So a lot of people, picture's worth 1,000 words. A lot of people will come in talking to our consultants, and we can show them, hey, this is how we see that it's represented, and they look and say, oh yeah, that's right. That's the app, that's the server, that's the database, and whatnot. But I can also start to take that and add additional tiers to that application, so we can start to see, oh, okay, yes, here's this application, but I can see it's connected here. I can see it's connected to this virtual server, to vCenter. Here are all the Blade servers. So I can start to look at various views of what that looks like. Okay. Go back to my dependency analyzer here. So a few other things that I can do when I'm in here. I can take a look here. I can look at this in full screen. I can, here's my legend that shows me all of this information, around what these are. But I can also start to say, all right, well, here's this group, but how have we put this together in events or bundles and whatnot? And I can start to look and say, well, show me the different colors, and you can start to see, all right, I've got multiple bundles within this group. How can I take action on those, and what can I look at? Another way of doing that is to say, well, let me show any conflicts that I might have with those bundles. and I can look and say, oh, look at all these conflicts are highlighted, and I can then drill down and say, okay, why are these things, and the system will highlight why these are conflicts. So my application might be in one particular bundle, but the assets might be in another bundle. So again, it allows me to take multiple views of what that is, and then again, the most important piece of that is being able to take action on that data. So, you know, as we stated up front, any one of these projects, any IT project, a transformation or a migration or just other IT, you know, modernization types of projects that you're working on, you need to be able to understand what the data is. And just to go back, you know, the way we get that data in is from you. We'll take it from whatever sources you have, we'll map it into our system, and we'll do those imports. And those imports are the basis for us sitting down with your subject matter experts. So that's application subject matter experts or owners, it's system administrators, it's database administrators. A lot of times what we find in environments where folks will say, well, I don't have a clear picture, I don't have all the data. What we find is you have most of it, if not all of it, but it's siloed. And so you've got things from the sysadmins might keep this spreadsheet, and these people over here on the application side have just their application side. So you've never seen it all together. So the assumption is we don't have a clear picture. You know, I tell folks a lot of times when we go in, it's the database team that tends to pull these spreadsheets out and start to make these connections that maybe the application group couldn't or the system admin folks couldn't. They start to make some of these connections. So we talk to everybody within the organization. We talk to folks to get that clear picture and to be able to you know, again, bring the picture that I showed at the beginning to light. And our system automatically generates these types of diagrams and connections as the app owners and other folks will start to give us that information, and we get the full picture. So if I drill down into one of these, for example, in an application, and this is the information that I've gotten supplied to me. So I still need to get SME information, and I still need to get other dependencies, as we only have servers. So again, this is information that we've been supplied by the customer, and now I've got to start collecting more information. And the way I do that is through my interview process, where I just open up a screen and I can add different dependencies. You know, I can add app-to-app dependencies. I can add app-to-server dependencies and different things like that. And it's very straightforward. All the information's been loaded into our system, so I can start to show different dependencies. You know, here's a dependency on this particular, and what's the type of connection that it has. And again, I'm starting to pull together that big picture of what those dependencies are. And you see that I've added that dependency, and now if I go back and regenerate my picture, it shows that dependency now in there. So it's continuously changing and evolving, and allows our analysts and customers to be able to make those decisions based on what those connections are. And change management is another big piece of all of this, right? So through the process, we expect business as usual, right? We don't expect a 12-month project or longer, or, you know, in that area, to not have change, right? So we expect the BAU, and as things change, we want to make sure that we're plugged into that change management process. So things that come up that are going to impact, if I'm adding a server to an application, or I'm adding an application that eventually is going to have to migrate, I want to make sure all of those things have been captured. And so what we'll do is plug into that change control, your change management, you know, the change advisory board if you have one, and understand what changes are in effect and make all those changes within to Transition Manager. So, whether you've updated your CMDBs or not, we want to make sure all of that information is captured here and reflected, because things could change as far as the planning based upon that information. And again, that's a fairly straightforward thing to do. If somebody comes and says, yeah, we've added these 2 servers, I'll go into that application and I'll add those 2 servers. It doesn't necessarily change any dependency information, but if it does, I can regenerate my dependencies, which is a straightforward thing to do as well. I could go in and generate the dependencies based on a lot of data that I have. I could ignore certain connection types of my data. I could look at certain statuses and say, okay, I want to collect all of these, and then I will regenerate. And it's a fairly quick thing that happens, where all these dependencies get taken care of, and now my dependency groups may have shifted around a little bit and may have changed. And I can go back in and take a look at what they are, take a look at the diagrams. We can run through the process. An example or a few examples of we've used this at customers where we've showed this in early stages of the project, and customers say, wow, that looks great. And one of our customers was saying, I thought that looked great, but wasn't sure how we were going to be able to use it. Until we sat in front of them, and they said, look, we've got these 2 major applications that cannot migrate on the same weekend. And they were in the same group that you're looking at right here. So, picture these 2 things right here, these 2 large applications, they can't move together. So we had to determine, okay, how are we going to split those apart without causing application outages or issues surrounding that. And so we went through a workshop where this was up on a screen and a WebEx, and we had all different folks were in there, database folks, system folks, application people, and picking things apart and looking at, oh, okay, that's a shared database, so I can just move that database to a different server. Okay, let's break that dependency. And we did that, and we did. So we went through and did all this with using this information right here, and we're able to make several cuts, I'd say upwards of 24 cuts to this, and be able to do that migration without impacting those applications negatively in any way. And that same customer said, I saw this early on in the process and wondered, this is great, I'm not sure how we would use that until now, and now I look at this and say, I'm not sure how I would do it other than in this way, in this fashion. So the system has lists of dependencies. So if I look at the list of dependencies, you can see here are all, here's what you're looking at. You're looking at the same thing that you looked at in that diagram, except it's in a list. And I can go down and tick and tie and look at that. And there are some cases where we want to look at it this way, but you can see the effectiveness in this diagram versus a list to allow you to make those sorts of decisions and see your data in a different way. So that's the system, that's Transition Manager. Again, we have subsequent webinars where we can show deeper diving into some of these areas. Specifically our automated runbooks, which is it's an automated workflow system where we can get dashboards during an event that show different status, that show high level, great executive dashboards that can show different phases of the project and how things go. And we'll dive into those in subsequent webinars. So I want to flash back here. And Eric talked a little bit about the Gordian Knot, or referred to the Gordian Knot. And for those who are familiar, it's really we liken it to the complexity of your IT environment, right? So you have this thing, it's all raveled together, and you have to learn how how to unravel it and break it apart in order to make those decisions and to go on with certain IT projects, right? And there's an image down below on the right that really talks to what we were talking about earlier, those disparate tools that are all very good and serve purposes within your operational environment in different areas, but from a migration standpoint, we'll use all of those to pull them into Transition Manager so we get that big picture and then we understand what to do with that picture.
Okay, thanks, Tim. And with that, we're opening it up to questions. And one question we have is whether a successful transition scheme, plan, or process that you use for one vertical industry, is that unique or does it apply to other industries? So how much of this is reusable across industries and how much of it is specific to the individual company and goals and objectives?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we find that to be, when we go through a process and talk to customers, a lot of times they'll say, yeah, but have you ever done a move in the healthcare industry? We're different and finance is different. And while there are certain uniquenesses to that, I think the approach is always the same in that, we have to gather the data. Now, certain data within healthcare, for example, like whether it touches patient health, there's EPHI data, or financial, that there's PCI data, understanding that, and certain financial closes versus others. There's definitely those differences, but the approach to any migration project starts the same and ends the same with the migrating of the data and the servers and applications.
Yeah, Tim, I think that's spot on. The only thing I'd add is that as you said, that there's certain data elements that might be similar within a certain vertical or sector. The differences are more to do with the technologies that are being transformed or migrated. And so if you're doing a completely virtual transfer or building up a new data center and just cutting over, that has much more of an impact than the actual vertical industry that you're involved in.
Okay, there's another question here that says, if I use different sources, Excel and auto discovery tools and others, there seems to be a lot of duplication of data between these systems. So how do I resolve any inconsistencies between these?
Right, and that is the challenge, right? So there will be duplication of data because, as we mentioned, different people keep different pieces of information. Some may be more inclusive and others are just partial to that. And so what we do is we'll look at all of those different sources and we'll take that and map those into our system. And we have a pretty complex sheet that we use to map things in and understand that this equals this. We have clarifying discussions with the customer to make sure if there's anything that we want to make sure, is this the same as that or is that different, and how we characterize that. So that's how we manage that.
Yeah, I'd also just add in that from a process standpoint, the more visibility and collaboration you can have, with a centralized tool like Transition Manager, definitely makes it more efficient than passing around lots of files, which can get very fragmented and people not knowing where things stand.
And maybe, I guess one of the questions is why not just track everything, all fields from all sources? Wouldn't that be easier?
Yeah, and so we've noticed over the years and paid a lot of attention to this, in that there's actually a cost to every single data element or attribute that you're tracking and managing. So if you, as an individual, you look at a online form that has 100 or 150 fields, it's going to be overwhelming to take it all in, and your eye's going to be drawn to different aspects, or maybe if there's a typo in some field. And so there's a cost to the whole team for even just having data sit there, even if you're not going to act on it, by distracting everybody. And they become a little less efficient. And so we're fairly deliberate in our process to describe, what's the impact for this given data element? Why are we tracking this field? What decision we're going to make based on that data? And allows us to focus and drill into just the right data points and things that we need. And so it's very easy to understand what's missing that we need in order to go ahead and make planning and scheduling decisions.
And I'll add to that too, Craig, is that we can take all the data in, or we can take additional data in, but we also have the ability to hide that data in the UI so that it's not distracting. So if at some point we decide, we do want to use that data after all, that we have it, that we don't have to go back out and get that data. So we make those decisions early in the process between ourselves and our customers.
So here's a question. Why do you focus so much at the application level? As long as you can move the device or VM, isn't that sufficient?
Sure. And the original intent of Transition Manager was fairly low level, and we actually migrated it up the stack to work more on applications. Because what we found out is the business at the end of the day doesn't really care about the specific infrastructure items. They care about what it's going to do to the overall business, and the easiest way to map those and map that impact is through applications, because that's really where the junction is between infrastructure and business. And so whether that app represents a cluster of apps or a single individual piece of software, it can be switched around, but you really need to do that mapping so you have a very clear indication. If we migrate these servers on this day, here's what's going to happen to the business, and have the business sign off on that.
Okay, thanks. And another question here, can Transition Manager report the network ports used by a server? And I guess maybe just abstract that to, can Transition Manager be used to track various information about any asset class? Maybe.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've early on also noticed that different projects have different needs, and so some are very network focused because of the particulars about that client, that we need to track a bunch of data related to that as far as ports or transfer volumes or communication needs or other aspects. And so the data model that we use, or structure of the data, changes slightly between, and we've got roughly 100 customizable fields that we can throw any sort of data in on any of these assets. And so identifying that need, we'll just tag a number of those for network ports or whatever the other data element is needed.
Great. Okay, so we've scheduled a half hour. We are at the half hour mark. We want to be respectful for everyone's time. We thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, you can email back to us through the registration form that you had received. And thank you very much for joining.